The wind howled through the empty church, the sound like 1,000 voices wailing from the distant hills. The doors stood open, swinging on their hinges, as though the building had been abandoned long ago. The pews were overturned, the altar cracked in two, and the delicate lace of the bridal veil fluttered in the breeze, caught on a shattered stained glass window. Maggie Worth stood alone at the center of it all, her white dress trailing across the dusty floor, her face streaked with tears that had long since dried. Her hands were clenched at her sides, the ring still resting heavy on her finger, a symbol of a promise broken. Her breath hitched as she turned toward the back of the church, hearing the unmistakable sound of boots on the wooden steps. "You're late," she whispered to the empty room, but the words felt hollow. She hadn't expected him to show. Not after what happened. Her gaze flickered to the crumpled letter on the ground, the one that had torn her world apart. "I can't marry you," it had said. "I'm not the man you think I am." No explanation, no apology, just the cold, harsh finality of it. And then, as the minutes bled into hours and the guests had murmured their goodbyes, Maggie had made a choice. She'd left everything behind. She wasn't running from him, not entirely. She was running from the lie he'd lived. Footsteps. Slower now, measured. Not the hurried steps of a man who'd come to stop her. These steps were deliberate. They spoke of someone who already knew everything. Then, as if time itself held its breath, the door creaked again. Maggie's heart skipped. She didn't want to look, didn't want to face what might be on the other side. But she did. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and rugged, the familiar outline of a cowboy who'd once been the hero of her childhood dreams. A cowboy she never expected to see again. His voice was low, calm. "Maggie." Her knees nearly buckled. But there he stood, framed by the sunlight behind him, the man who'd disappeared years ago. "Why now?" she croaked, her voice betraying the flood of emotions she couldn't contain. The cowboy took a step forward. "I never meant to leave," he said. "But I'm here now. I've come to take you home." Maggie's pulse quickened. The last thing she needed was another man pulling her in two different directions. The wind caught the veil again, sending it fluttering toward the door, like a ghost escaping its bonds. The cowboy didn't move, didn't blink. His eyes were fixed on hers. "I'm not here to hurt you, Maggie," he said. "I'm here to fix what I broke." And just like that, the past came rushing back. Maggie didn't know what to do. Her hands trembled as she tightened her grip on the bouquet she still held, though it was withered now, a sad mockery of the hopes she'd once carried. The cowboy's eyes, those same dark eyes that had haunted her every waking hour after he'd vanished, were locked on her. She could feel the weight of his gaze as if it were a physical presence pressing on her chest, forcing the air from her lungs. "Why now?" she repeated, her voice shaking. The cowboy stepped forward, the dust from the old wooden floor swirling around his boots. He moved with a kind of grace that belied the hardened strength in his frame, his presence commanding even the silence of the church. "I was wrong to leave. I should have stayed, but there was more at stake than just us." Her mind raced, but her heart stayed rooted in the wreckage of her broken dreams. "More at stake than us?" she whispered bitterly. "You left me with nothing but a letter and a broken heart, Elijah. What could possibly be more important than that?" He flinched, the weight of her words hitting harder than any bullet he'd ever taken. "It wasn't like that. You have to understand. I don't have to understand anything." Maggie cut him off, her voice steadying, finding strength in the anger that surged beneath her hurt. "You made your choice, and I made mine. I'm done with all of this." Elijah swallowed, his jaw tightening. "You're right. I left you. But I never stopped thinking about you, Maggie. Not a day went by that I didn't regret it. Not a single damn day." She shook her head, backing away, her footsteps echoing in the silence. "You don't get to come back into my life now, not after everything." The cowboy's face tightened with frustration, but it was more than that. There was a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said, his voice raw. "But I'm asking for one. I'm asking for us." Maggie's heart ached. There it was, The man she'd loved, the man who had shattered her. She wanted to scream, to tell him that she was fine on her own, that she didn't need him. But the truth was, she did need him. She'd never stopped needing him. But there was something else, too. A dark truth she wasn't sure she could outrun. "You can't fix what's already broken," she said quietly. "Not between us. Not with a few words." He took another step forward. "Maggie, I'm not asking for forgiveness, at least not yet. But I can't walk away knowing that you're still out here, alone. We've both lost too much already." The silence hung between them, thick and charged with everything unspoken. Her chest tightened, her mind racing. If she let him back in, would it be the same as before? Could she trust him again? Was it even worth it? Maggie's breath caught as something else creaked in the distance, a sound too familiar to be ignored. A rider. The rhythmic thud of hooves. Elijah heard it too. His eyes flickered toward the door, narrowing. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice suddenly sharp. She took a step back, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. A part of her wanted to run, to leave this place and never look back. But another part, one she couldn't deny, still longed for the life they might have had. A voice broke the tension, low and gravelly from the doorway. "Maggie?" Her heart skipped. There, silhouetted in the doorway, was another man, a stranger, but with a look of grim purpose in his eyes. He wasn't alone. Behind him, a group of riders appeared, their horses stamping the earth beneath them. Elijah stepped in front of her, his hand brushing the gun at his side. "You'd better get off my land, mister." The stranger's lips curled into a sneer. "Ain't your land, Cowboy?" "Not anymore." The air inside the church grew heavier, thick with the scent of dust and tension. Maggie's breath caught in her throat as the sound of the riders' hooves grew louder, pounding through the silence like a storm gathering force. She instinctively stepped back, her eyes darting to the windows, to the door, anywhere but toward Elijah, who stood firm, a silhouette of resolve and anger. The stranger didn't move, his gaze locked on Elijah, measuring him like a predator assessing prey. His voice was rough, mocking. "You should have stayed gone, Cowboy. You're a long way from where you belong." Elijah's hand tightened around the handle of his Colt, though he didn't draw it yet. His posture was relaxed, but there was a tension in the air, as if any slight movement could set the world ablaze. "I didn't ask for your company, nor your words, friend. So why don't you turn around and take your men back where they came from?" The stranger chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you? I thought maybe you'd forgotten who owns this land. But then, I figured you'd be back eventually. You always do." Maggie's pulse raced as she glanced toward the windows again. The riders had stopped just beyond the church's frame, and she could hear the shuffling of boots, the rustle of leather and stirrup. There were at least 5 men, each one bearing the same grim look in their eyes. They weren't here for a social call. "Elijah," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's going on? Who are they?" Elijah didn't answer right away. His eyes never left the stranger, and Maggie could see the muscles in his jaw twitching as he fought to keep his composure. "They're the men I ran from, Maggie," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "The ones I left behind when I got out. They're part of the reason I couldn't stay. They don't let people walk away from them." The stranger smiled, slow and cold, like a wolf savoring its prey. "You think you can just walk away, Elijah? You're not the first man to try. And you sure as hell won't be the last." Maggie's heart pounded in her chest. "You're not running anymore, are you?" she asked, though the words felt hollow even as they left her mouth. The idea of Elijah going back to those men, of him choosing them over her, it hurt more than she cared to admit. He turned his head just enough to look at her, his eyes softening. "I'm not running," he said firmly. "But this isn't just about us. These men, they've got more blood on their hands than either of us can count. And if I don't face them now, they'll burn everything to the ground. Including you." Maggie's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how to respond. What was the right choice here? To stand beside him, or to run far away from this nightmare? Either way, She knew they wouldn't walk out of this without paying a price. The stranger's laughter broke through the silence, cold and mocking. You always were a damn fool, Elijah. You think you can save her? You think you can walk out of this with your life? Elijah's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't have a choice, he muttered. The stranger raised his hand, signaling his men. One by one, the riders dismounted, their boots thudding heavily against the floorboards as they approached the church with an unsettling calm. Maggie's heart thundered in her chest, and she knew, in that moment, there would be no talking their way out. No negotiating. Step aside, Cowboy, the stranger ordered, drawing his gun from its holster. His fingers were sure, practiced, and the metal gleamed in the light. Elijah didn't move, his gaze narrowing, calculating. I'm not leaving. You can shoot me right here, but you're going to have to face the consequences. The stranger's smile widened as he raised his pistol higher. The only consequence, Elijah, is you're not walking away from this alive. Not today! Maggie's hands flew to her chest, heart racing as the men closed in, and her stomach twisted in fear. She didn't know what was about to happen, didn't know what Elijah had planned, if he even had a plan. But the wind outside picked up again, blowing through the church like an omen. And then, from the farthest corner, a voice called out sharply. Hold it right there! Maggie turned, her heart skipping as a new figure appeared in the doorway, a man dressed in black, his hat low over his face. His voice was steady, unshaken by the standoff. He stepped forward, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. The riders froze, and even Elijah looked over, his expression hardening. Who the hell are you? The stranger barked, lowering his gun just slightly. The man in black didn't flinch. Someone who's tired of watching you bully this town. Maggie's heart skipped again, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of recognition in Elijah's eyes. The tension in the room thickened, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. It was no longer just about Elijah. The church had become a battleground, and the stakes had just gone higher than she could have imagined. The room fell into a heavy silence, each breath drawn tight as the newcomer stood in the doorway, his figure framed by the fading light outside. Maggie's heart still pounded in her chest, but now it wasn't just the fear of the riders or the danger to Elijah. It was the weight of something unspoken between them. She couldn't see the man's face clearly, but the way Elijah stiffened told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a random stranger. This was someone Elijah had once known. Someone he didn't expect to find here. The stranger in black spoke again, his voice low but full of quiet authority. You all might want to reconsider your next move. Things don't have to end this way. One of the riders, a large man with a scar running down the side of his face, laughed bitterly. Who the hell are you to tell us what to do, stranger? The man in black stepped into the church, his boots steady and his presence unyielding. I'm someone who's seen what happens when men like you think they can run roughshod over everyone. I've spent too long chasing ghosts. I'm done with it. Maggie caught Elijah's eye, and for the briefest moment, she saw the man he used to be before everything went wrong. There was something raw in his gaze, something fragile, like the man standing before her wasn't entirely the hardened cowboy he'd become. The air between them shifted, like a fog lifting. It wasn't just a threat of violence anymore, it was something deeper, something more personal. Elijah, she whispered, her voice softer than she meant it to be. Who is he? Elijah didn't immediately answer, his eyes locked on the man in black as if trying to make sense of a lifetime that had been left behind. His voice came out rough, barely above a murmur. His name's Cain. He's the reason I left. Maggie's breath itched. You mean, he's the one who? Yeah, Elijah interrupted, his voice tight. The one who put me on the run. Cain didn't seem to hear their conversation. He walked further into the church, his boots making little sound, as if he'd become a part of the very walls themselves. His eyes never left the group of riders, but it wasn't anger they held. It was something older. Something Maggie couldn't quite place. You're gonna want to listen to him, Elijah said quietly, his voice low as if speaking to himself. Cain's the one who saved my life. And he's the one who made sure I didn't end up like you. The riders shifted uneasily at the mention of Cain's name, each one glancing at the other, as if trying to read a threat in the air. But they didn't speak. They were still too stunned, too wary of the man they thought was nothing more than a ghost. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. The room was frozen, the tension a living thing, swirling in the dusty beams of the church. Cain's presence hung like a weight, pressing on the riders, on Elijah, and even Maggie, who had no place in this old story but felt herself caught in it all the same. Then, slowly, the man in black spoke again. This doesn't need to end in blood. But if it's blood you want, then I can promise you'll be getting a lot more than you bargained for. His eyes flicked toward Elijah, and there was something there, something that passed between them like a secret language. Elijah's hand twitched near his holster, but he didn't draw his gun. He didn't need to. Cain had already said everything that needed to be said. The riders knew the truth. Cain wasn't a man to back down. Not for anyone. Maggie stepped forward, her feet heavy on the creaking floorboards, her eyes flickering between the two men, searching for any sign of a way out. She could feel the pull of the past, the weight of the choices both Elijah and Cain had made. They were men carved from the same hard earth, shaped by violence and regret. But there was a part of her that refused to surrender. A part of her that still held on to hope. Elijah, she said quietly, her voice breaking through the heavy silence. What happens now? Elijah turned toward her, his face a mixture of weariness and resolve. His eyes softened as he looked at her, but the burden of the decision hung heavy on him. I don't know, Maggie. But I'm not running anymore. Not from you, not from them. Cain's gaze flickered toward her, and for a moment, Maggie caught the barest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a comforting smile, though. It was a smile that carried the weight of old wounds, of paths already taken. You don't have to choose between us, Maggie, Cain said softly. Elijah's got the heart, but he's too stubborn to see that sometimes the world doesn't give you the luxury of making the right choice. She swallowed hard. It was a statement that stung with truth. Elijah had been too proud to ask for help, too determined to walk his own road, and now that road had led him right back here, to this moment. To Cain. To her. For a fleeting moment, the tension broke, and Maggie felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was peace, maybe it was understanding. She didn't know. All she knew was that the man she had once loved stood before her, still fighting, still carrying a past that had never truly let go. And the man in black, Cain, stood by his side, offering nothing but the knowledge that the past could never be outrun, only faced. Maggie exhaled, her chest tight, and then she made her decision. I'm not running either, she said, her voice firm despite the ache in her heart. But I won't stand in your shadow, Elijah. Not anymore. The riders shifted again, their patience running thin, but neither Elijah nor Cain seemed concerned. The last choice had been made, and the path they were about to walk would be anything but simple. The moment stretched out, as though the world was holding its breath. The riders, still silent, could feel it too, the impending storm, the weight of the past that none of them could outrun. Maggie's heart beat heavy in her chest, the decision she had made ringing clear in her mind. She wasn't just standing beside Elijah. She was choosing a new kind of life. A life without running. Without the lies. She was choosing truth, no matter how hard it might be. Elijah's hand didn't leave his gun, but the tension in his shoulders slackened just a bit. Cain stood like a mountain, unmoved by the stares of the men who had once been his enemies. The riders knew there was no turning back now. The weight of history pressed down on them all, and there was no easy way to settle the score. The man with the scar took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. You think you can just waltz back in and start calling the shots, Cain? The man in black gave him a cold smile, his voice low. I didn't come here for your forgiveness or your permission. I came because you have a debt to pay. And so do you, Elijah. The tension in the room crackled as the two men, past and present, shared a silent understanding. Maggie's eyes flickered between them. She could feel something shifting in the air, something that spoke of the old ghosts that haunted them both. The scarred man's hand went for his gun, but Elijah was faster. In one swift motion, his Colt was drawn, the gunshot echoing through the church like thunder. The scarred man crumpled to the floor, his body twitching for a moment before falling still. Cain moved like lightning, his own gun drawn and aimed at the remaining riders before they even had time to blink. He was a blur of cold precision, his actions too quick to follow. Another man dropped, another rider backed away, hands raised, eyes wide in disbelief. Maggie didn't flinch. She didn't look away. There was no turning back, no place for hesitation. This wasn't the life she had imagined, but it was the life she had been given. The remaining men hesitated, their faces twisted with fear and uncertainty. Cain's voice rang out, clear and final. "You can leave. Now. Or I'll bury every last one of you right here." A few glanced at each other, weighing their options. The standoff hung in the air, a battle of wills. Finally, one by one, the riders turned and fled, retreating into the fading light, their horses kicking up dust as they made their hasty exit. Maggie exhaled, the tension leaving her all at once, like a storm passing. She felt something she hadn't in a long time, the sting of reality, the weight of the choices she had made. Elijah holstered his gun, his hand lingering on the leather for just a moment longer than necessary. He didn't look at her, didn't speak, but she could see the conflict in his eyes, the same silent struggle that had always been between them. The door of the church creaked as the last of the riders disappeared. The wind outside had died down, and all that remained was the quiet of the fading afternoon. Maggie stepped forward, moving past Elijah to stand beside Cain, who was already turning toward the door. "Elijah," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. "It's over. We don't have to keep fighting." For a long moment he didn't answer. He simply stood there, his back to her, the weight of the past pressing down on him like an old wound. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he turned to face her. His eyes were tired, worn from the weight of the years and the choices that had led them to this moment. "I know," he said, his voice rough. "I know it's over. But it's not the end for me. Not yet." Cain glanced back, his expression unreadable. "The past doesn't give us much room for redemption, Elijah. But it'll give you a start." Maggie stood there, caught between two men she had loved in different ways. The weight of everything they had been through together, everything they had lost, hung heavy in the air. She knew what Elijah was saying, that the fight wasn't over for him. But she also knew that the world wasn't as simple as it used to be. "Maybe," she said softly. "But the past is only what we make of it. You're not alone anymore." Elijah looked at her, his gaze searching, but there was no bitterness in his eyes. No anger. Just the weariness of a man who had seen too much, and was still trying to find his way back from it all. Cain stepped toward the door, the setting sun casting long shadows across the wooden floor. "You can keep running, Elijah. But you can't outrun who you are. The past will catch up eventually. And when it does, you'll have to face it." Maggie looked from Elijah to Cain, feeling a strange calm settle over her. She wasn't running anymore. Not from either of them. "I'm ready," she said quietly. Elijah nodded, as if accepting something he couldn't change. "Then let's go. Together." The three of them stepped out into the fading daylight, the soft orange of the sunset stretching across the horizon. The world felt quiet now, the noise of the past finally fading into the distance. As they walked down the church steps, the weight of all they had been through seemed lighter, less like a burden and more like something they could face together. Years later, Maggie would remember that moment. Not for the violence, not for the pain, but for the way the world had shifted. For the way they had all chosen to face what had come, instead of running. And the final image of her memory would always be the sunset, the wide open sky, and the three of them walking forward, no longer trapped by their past, but free at last. The last frame lingered in her mind, a single silhouette, the sun dipping below the horizon, and the wind that had once carried the dust of old battles now carrying the promise of something new.